Forget the Hollywood version. Real gunmen didn't strut around with gleaming revolvers and costume-perfect belts. Their lives hinged on fractions of a second. Any tiny advantage they could shave off the draw meant living to see another sunrise. The quickest weren't always the toughest or the boldest. They were the ones who analyzed every movement, every error, and turned it into leverage. They trimmed their holsters, cinched them tight, and drilled until the draw became a single, fluid snap. No staged duels. No dramatic countdowns. Just raw survival. 13 concealed tricks, some mechanical, others psychological, all crafted to get steel in hand before the other man even realized danger was coming. And if you're curious about where firearms evolved from there, Colts to carbines, dusty trails to modern battlefields, check out my World War II channel, Brass and Blitz, for the serious history of World War II firepower. Now back to the frontier, no myths, no movie staging, just the real mechanics behind how the West truly drew. Take a breath, settle your nerves, and meet the technique that looked polite, but lit more fights than it settled. Number 13, the coat sweep, concealed the draw in an innocent motion. Cinema turned it into a flashy cape-whipping gesture. But the real coat sweep was subtle and strategic. Frontier pistoliers understood that speed meant nothing if the enemy saw it coming. So they practiced a harmless-looking move, brushing a long coat or frock aside as if shifting their clothes. Inside that slight motion, the gun hand slipped to the revolver grip, hidden by the sweep of fabric. To onlookers, it looked like nothing, just a man adjusting his coat at the bar. But when the coat settled, the gun was already half drawn. It fooled more opponents than any theatrical quick-draw stunt ever filmed. Accounts from Dodge City and Tombstone describe lawmen resting their hands near their coat hems long before a confrontation began. Body language doing the work before the gun cleared leather. The coat sweep wasn't just fast, it was invisible. And invisibility was often the deciding factor. Number 12. The pre-positioned hand. Always one movement ahead. Some gunfighters didn't need a hidden trick. They simply kept their hand close to the holster at all times. A simple principle ruled them. Never let the shooting hand drift far from the grip. On the frontier, every flicker of time mattered. A half step, a breath, a slight shift. Any of it could decide who lived. So men expecting danger kept their fingers hooked casually on their gun belt or resting near the holster mouth. It was such a natural pose that people barely noticed. Photos of Bat Masterson, Luke Short, and other lawmen show the same stance. Thumb tucked in the belt, elbow loose, gaze calm. They weren't striking a pose. They were preparing. Witnesses in towns like Dodge and Abilene described gunfights that began with the tiniest motion, the fingers tightening, the wrist turning, and the pistol was in play before the other man even touched his belt. It wasn't a duel. It was anticipation. The pre-positioned hand didn't necessarily make you faster. It made you first. Number 11, the cross-draw advantage, speed from the wrong side. It looked unconventional because it was. The cross-draw rig placed the revolver on the opposite hip, angled forward so you reached across your body to pull it. Hollywood exaggerated it, but on the frontier, it existed for purely functional reasons. Riders, stagecoach guards, and officers who spent their days seated learned that a strong side holster jammed against saddles, chairs, or coat hems. A cross-draw let them pull cleanly without twisting or snagging the gun on reins, counters, or clothing. Its roots came from cavalry training. Mounted troops in the 1850s and 60s wore their pistols butt forward on the right, so they could draw left-handed while controlling the horse with the right. After the Civil War, veterans carried the habit west, passing it on to scouts, gamblers, marshals, and anyone who needed to fight from horseback or a seated position. Images of Wild Bill Hickok, early Rangers, and others show that forward-facing grip and across-the-belt reach. Hickok often rested both hands on his pistols, ready whether standing still or sitting at a card table. The cross-draw wasn't the quickest method, but it was the most versatile. You could defend yourself while seated, mounted, or in tight quarters, which mattered more than a fraction of a second in a fair fight. Surviving holsters in museums like the Autry and the Buffalo Bill Center show deep, forward-leaning throats and heavy wear on the inner edge. classic evidence of the cross-draw pull. It wasn't built for flash. It was built for men who lived their lives moving. And a few took that practical idea and pushed it into something even fiercer. Number 10. The butt-forward cavalry draw, the soldier's shortcut. Long before cowboys refined it, the U.S. cavalry drilled it into troopers. The butt-forward draw started in the saddle, created for mounted combat and nothing else. Soldiers wore their revolvers high on the right hip with the grip pointing forward. That way the left hand stayed on the reins while the right reached across the body, twisted the wrist, and pulled the gun free in one smooth sweep. It looked strange, but it functioned. The revolver came out cleanly without snagging on coats, belts, or saddle parts. Civil War-era manuals from places like Watervliet Arsenal and Colt's Ordnance Office even illustrated the reverse draw step by step. After the war, veterans carried the habit into the frontier, using it with Colt 1860 armies, Remington 1858s, and later the Peacemaker. But once on foot, the move showed its weakness, the twist. One bad grip or rushed motion could swing the barrel across your own torso before the hammer was thumbed back. Plenty of accidental discharges convinced frontier peace officers to trade it for the safer cross-draw or strong-side holsters. Even so, the practice left fingerprints behind. Early photos of scouts and ex-cavalrymen in Texas and New Mexico show those same forward-facing holsters. Battlefield habits transformed into trail gear. The butt-forward draw was never stylish. It was pure mounted muscle memory, a soldier's shortcut that lingered long after the bugle calls faded. Number 9. The high-ride holster trick. Speed measured in inches. The quickest draw didn't always come from exotic leatherwork or secret routines. Sometimes it was just physics. By the 1870s, cowboys and officers began positioning their holsters higher on the belt, tight to the hip instead of hanging low on the thigh. The reason wasn't fashion, it was efficiency. A high-ride holster shortened the distance the hand needed to travel. Less reach meant less time, and on the frontier, a couple of inches could decide who walked away. The placement also kept the gun from flopping while riding and stopped the barrel from pounding against the leg during long days in the saddle. Surviving holsters from Texas and Kansas show smooth, polished wear just above the belt line, evidence of thousands of draws from the same high, tight spot. Some were even canted slightly forward to match the body's natural movement. Hollywood adored the low-slung look because it photographed well, but real gunmen wore theirs high for a reason. They weren't posing for cameras. They were trying to stay alive. Hollywood adored the low-slung look because it photographed well, but real gunmen wore theirs high for a reason. They weren't posing for cameras. They were trying to stay alive. These little advantages separated the names that survived from the ones that ended up on tombstones. Which one would have kept you breathing? Tell me below. I read every comment. Number 8. Tie-downs and thigh straps. Anchor it or lose it. A holster that shifted was a holster that betrayed you. Frontier men couldn't afford their gun to slide or swing in the middle of a fight. The fix was simple. Tie it down. By the late 1870s, trail hands and lawmen ran rawhide or leather thongs from the holster's bottom to the thigh or to a ring on their chaps. The strap kept everything locked in place through riding, brawls, and sudden desperate draws. It also prevented the muzzle from flaring outward, a flaw that slowed even the quickest hands. Old photographs of working cowboys often show a thin strap vanishing behind the leg. That practical detail later inspired Hollywood's flashy quick-draw rigs. But on the frontier, it was nothing more than problem-solving leatherwork. Pat Garrett reportedly used a tied-down rig while hunting Billy the Kid in 1881, and Texas Rangers made similar modifications to ensure their Colts stayed steady in the saddle. Some men used scraps of saddle lace. Others threaded a thong through a hole in the holster's tip and looped it around their thigh or through their pant leg. It wasn't pleasant, but it worked. The gun stayed planted, firm, predictable, ready, because when lives hung on fractions of a second, even a swaying holster was a risk too large to tolerate. Number 7. The Mexican loop rig, the cowboy's signature holster. If one holster embodies the American frontier, this is it. The Mexican loop rig wasn't just popular. It shaped the entire look of the West. Developed along the Mexican borderlands in the 1870s, it grew from older California-style holsters. Vaqueros and saddle makers discovered that adding a wide leather skirt behind the holster stiffened it and shielded it from wear. They cut long slits through the skirt and slid the holster pouch through them, forming the signature loops that held everything firmly in place without a single stitch. It was durable, simple, and easily repaired, all qualities a working cowboy needed. Riders on both sides of the Rio Grande adopted it quickly. By the time Colt's single-action army became the sixth gun of choice, nearly every frontier leather shop was producing some variation of the loop style. American makers like Maine and Winchester of San Francisco and Collins and Morrison of St. Louis added their own flourishes, heavier skirts, decorative tooling, and belts with integrated cartridge loops. The design spread across cattle drives, stage routes, and ranger camps with incredible speed. It didn't just look Western, it defined the West. Photographs of Texas Rangers, Arizona sheriffs, and trail herders all show that distinct curved outline hugging the hip, layered with sweat and dust. The Mexican loop gave speed without sacrificing strength. The open-top profile let the gun come out smoothly, while the broad skirt shielded the revolver from mud, dust, and trail grit. And unlike the flimsy holsters sold back east, this one could survive years of hard riding. Dozens of genuine examples still sit in collections today at the Autry Museum, the Buffalo Bill Center of the West, and ranch archives all across Texas. They all tell the same story. Function became legend. Hollywood later polished it, lowered it, glamorized it. But the real Mexican loop needed none of that. It was built for work, not looks. It wasn't just worn, it became part of a man's daily life. Number 6. Holster cutouts and frontier custom mods. A gunman's personal edge. No two holsters on the frontier were truly identical. Every rider, every sheriff, every gambler made subtle adjustments. Quiet little modifications that shaved off fractions of a second when it mattered. Most holsters started as plain saddler patterns from Kansas, New Mexico, or the borderlands. But the men who relied on them rarely left them untouched. Many sliced away leather around the trigger guard or hammer, carving a shallow half moon that let their fingers find the grip faster. Others trimmed the holster's opening so the cylinder and hammer stuck out, making the draw shorter and cleaner. These weren't decorative touches, they were survival decisions. Some holsters were stiffened with tallow or wax so the mouth stayed open after years of wear. Others were reinforced with rivets where stitching tended to tear, or reshaped at the belt loop to allow a new angle of draw. A few men even cut tiny grooves inside the holster to keep the revolver from shifting during a run. Collectors today call them customs. To the men who made them, they were simply tools, fixed, reworked, improved. Every nick and notch was experience carved into leather. The best rigs weren't pretty, they weren't fancy. They were shaped by hard lessons and tailored to one man's hand, not to the market. Speed didn't come from the gun, it came from the leather that freed it and from the man who knew exactly how to shape that leather. Number 5. The Bridgeport rig, the first true quick-draw device. If the Old West had a prototype for the modern fast-draw holster, this was it, and it was nearly too dangerous to survive. In 1882, Louis S. Flatow of Bridgeport, Connecticut, patented a strange little mechanism made of spring steel. Instead of leather, his holster was a metal clamp that snapped around the trigger guard of a Colt single-action army. The revolver hung completely exposed on the belt, hammer cocked, trigger uncovered, ready to jerk, twist, and fire almost instantly. Flatow called it the Bridgeport pistol holder. Dealers from New York to Kansas sold it as instant action for frontier shooters. For a short time, a few scouts, Wells Fargo messengers, and deputy sheriffs tried it out. And yes, it was unbelievably fast. But accidents came just as quickly. A stumble, a horse shying, a coat brushing the trigger, and suddenly the wearer had shot himself before a fight even started. Newspapers in Kansas and Texas reported grim little blurbs about deputies wounded while climbing wagons or couriers crippled by their own weapons. Within 2 years, towns were banning the thing outright. By the late 1880s, it disappeared from catalogs, and only a few remain in places like the Cody Firearms Museum and the NRA collection, rusted, warped, and scarred. Half a century later, Hollywood rediscovered the design, copied its look, and reinvented it as the flashy movie quick-draw rig we still see on screen. Real gunfighters had already learned the hard lesson. Speed means nothing if your holster shoots you before your enemy does. Number 4, the half-cock trick. Fast, risky, and not for the careless. Before revolvers had built-in safeties, all a man had was technique. The half-cock trick was a way to gain an edge, but it came with real danger. Single-action revolvers had multiple hammer positions. At the half-cock notch, the cylinder could rotate freely, yet the gun wouldn't fire unless the hammer slipped. Gunfighters treated that notch like a stopwatch. They would start the draw with the hammer already lifted partway, then finish cocking it with the same hand just as the gun leveled on the target. Done properly, it shaved a heartbeat off the time between grip and shot. Manuals and shooters' accounts from the 1870s through the 1890s describe men drilling thumb work the same way athletes train footwork today. A skilled hand could half-cock, full-cock, or thumb-cock in the motion of clearing leather, a seamless blend of hammer, wrist, and draw. But the half-cock came with a razor-thin margin for error. A worn spring, a weak sear, or a hurried thumb could let the hammer drop early. That meant a shot into the dirt, into your own leg, or into someone you didn't intend to hit. Many shooters preferred a clean, two-step sequence: draw, then cock. Others, the ones who lived on risk, practiced the half-cock until it became muscle memory, because the split second it saved might be the difference between living and being remembered in a newspaper column. Watching an expert work a single-action revolver was like watching a mechanic tune an engine. Precise, fluid, and always slightly dangerous. The half-cock wasn't a gimmick. It was a calculated gamble. More speed for less safety. And once the fight shifted from the street to the saddle, most men abandoned it entirely. On horseback, they relied on the animal, the holster, and the rifle scabbard. Which leads to number 3, saddle scabbards and mounted draws. Rifle ready, rifle steady. Riding transformed everything about frontier combat. You couldn't just hang a rifle over your back and tear across open country. A loose firearm meant disaster. It could fly off, crack your wrist, or be lost for good. So the plainsmen came up with something simple, tough, and ingenious: the saddle scabbard. By the 1860s, cavalry troopers and scouts were already shaping leather sheaths that held repeating rifles muzzle down, but angled forward alongside the rider's thigh. Henry's, Winchesters, and Spencer carbines traveled in these hardened leather cases, tied to the saddle horn or skirt, shielded from dust, storms, and the grind of the trail. Drawing the gun became a single, practiced fluid action. Slide the hand forward, lift, and the rifle cleared the leather in the same heartbeat that the rider shifted their balance. Military and civilian patterns looked different, but worked the same. Army scabbards favored stiff reinforcement and metal throats. Frontier craftsmen soaked leather in tallow, molded it wet, and stitched it snug so it fit one specific rifle like a second skin. Many scouts had their scabbards formed around their exact weapon, wood and leather aligning so perfectly the rifle almost lived in the saddle. Period accounts are blunt about its value. A mounted scout could yank out a carbine and fire while still at a gallop. It wasn't showmanship, it was survival. Working cattle, chasing game, or fighting off raiders, the scabbard turned the horse into an extension of the gunfighter's kit. Surviving examples show heavy wear around the throat, where leather scraped wood day after day. Some had small pockets for spare rounds or tools. Riders even devised quick-release straps so a heavy carbine could be freed one-handed while the other held the reins. It solved a frontier problem Hollywood rarely gets right: mobility and firepower working together. But once a man stepped off his horse, a different kind of fight began. Then he relied on sidearms and on rigs crafted purely for speed. Number 2, the misdirection draw, the art of the distraction. Not every deadly encounter began with a glare or a twitch. Sometimes it started with a friendly grin. The most seasoned gunfighters understood that the fastest draw wasn't always the quickest hand. It was the one the other man never recognized until it was too late. They perfected the misdirection draw, a blend of casual movement and hidden intent. A harmless gesture like adjusting a coat, shifting a stance, or reaching for a handshake masked the beginning of the draw. A sweep of fabric hid the grip, a slight turn concealed the wrist, and by the time the danger was noticed, the barrel was already leveled. Frontier newspapers and eyewitnesses describe men like Clay Allison and Luke Short using subtle misdirection in tense saloons, talking softly, moving naturally, but never losing track of the other man's hands. The secret wasn't raw speed, it was control. Make your opponent pause, blink, or react too slowly, and the gunfight was already finished. Gamblers learned these tricks as well. Sitting half-turned, coat loose, hand below the table, not to cheat, but to buy crucial fractions of a second if trouble brewed. The misdirection draw weaponized tension itself. It proved that the real contest wasn't who moved first, but who forced the other man to move wrong. Some fighters went even further, reshaping holsters, altering belt tension, and adjusting posture to shave off invisible slivers of time, which leads to the final edge among real gunfighters. Number 1. The tilted belt and cartridge customizations. The hidden advantage. The deadliest trick wasn't dramatic at all. It lived in the leather. Experienced gunmen never trusted factory-made rigs. They trimmed, restitched, and angled their holsters until the draw fit their body's exact movements. A slight forward tilt let the wrist roll naturally. A reinforced belt loop prevented shifting under stress. Small, nearly invisible adjustments turned instinct into precision. Some added cartridge loops exactly where the thumb passed, allowing faster reloads. Others tightened the holster's throat or shaved the edge so the pistol cleared the same way every single time. Photos don't reveal these tweaks, but the men who survived swore by them. Knowing your rig, truly knowing it, was often the difference between walking away and being carried off. Because the real quick draw advantage wasn't just about speed, it was about preparation. Skill lasts, practice endures, and the deadliest edge of all was the one nobody else could see. 13 small tricks, each one a slice of how the frontier was actually fought and survived. No Hollywood fantasy, no staged duels, just skill, instinct, and fractions of a second.